Hey there. You mentioned wanting to take a deeper look at your relationship with social media and maybe finding some healthier ways to use tech. And honestly, it's something I think we're all trying to figure out these days. So we're going to be using Digital Minimalism by Cal Newport to help us break this down a bit.
Oh, that's a good one. Newport's background is really interesting. He's a computer science professor at Georgetown, so he's coming to this with a deep understanding of how technology works and how it affects us.
Right. And it's not like he's anti-technology, which I like. It's more about just being intentional about it.
Exactly. One of the first things Newport talks about is this idea of the attention economy, which is basically this whole system that's designed to keep us glued to our screens. Companies are always competing for our attention, and they've gotten really good at using our psychology to do it.
It's almost scary how true that is.
Yeah.
Like the other day, I deleted this shopping app because I realized I was just scrolling through it every night. And guess what? 2 days later, I get this email. We miss you. Come back and see what you're missing. And it's like, the E-N-O-W?
Yeah. Exactly. And it's not even just about algorithms or whatever. It's about tapping into our need to connect with people and our fear of missing out, even our need for validation. All of that just gets amplified online.
Okay, so that's the attention economy. We're all part of it, whether we like it or not.
Mhm.
But how does that connect to this idea of digital minimalism?
Well, Newport says that by always giving in to those distractions online, we're actually stopping ourselves from really experiencing life. He uses a really powerful analogy from Plato. It's about a chariot.
Okay, chariot analogy now. I have to know more.
So imagine your soul is like the charioteer, right?
Right.
And they are trying to control two horses. One horse is your best intentions, your desire to do meaningful work and have good relationships and personal growth.
So like the things that actually matter to us in the long run, I mean.
Right. But then there's this other horse, which is like our more impulsive desires, those quick hits of dopamine we get from scrolling through social media or always checking notifications.
And that second horse, that one's a handful, I'm
Hmm.
guessing.
Yeah, you could say that. And the problem is that in today's world, that second horse is always being fed and stimulated by, everything online. So it just gets stronger and harder to control. And then the horse that's all about our best intentions just gets weaker.
Wow, that's a lot to think about.
Yeah.
So we're basically losing the strength to steer our lives how we want to because we're so caught up in these online distractions.
Exactly. And that's where digital minimalism comes in. It's about getting back control and choosing what we allow to, pull us in different directions.
It's like taking back your own power in a world that's constantly trying to tell you what to do.
Yeah, exactly. And Newport actually offers some really practical steps to help us do that.
Okay, now those are what I'm interested in, practical steps. But before we get into those, I think it's important to go back to something you said earlier. You mentioned that always being plugged in can stop us from really experiencing life. Can you talk more about that? Like, how do we even know if we're missing out? Like, deep down, we all know we'd be better off putting our phones down and, like, actually being present in the world. But it's so hard to actually do it, you know?
It really is. And Newport talks about that a lot, actually. He says it's like our brains are hardwired to want new things all the time, those instant rewards, which, the digital world is really good at. But those little bursts of good feelings, they don't actually make us feel good in the long run. They can actually make us feel kind of emptier.
Yeah, that makes sense. So it's not just about wasting time scrolling. It's more about what we're missing when we're, like, glued to our screens.
Right. Think about it. Every minute you're scrolling is a minute you're not having a real conversation or doing something you're passionate about or just like being present in the moment.
It's almost like we're trading real experiences for these fake ones we see online.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. What's interesting is Newport actually found that a lot of people, even those who consider themselves happy and successful, were surprised by how much better their lives felt when they started disconnecting and spending more time offline.
Okay, so how do we do that? How do we actually get away from this whole attention economy thing and take back our time and our attention?
So, one of the most helpful things Newport talks about is this thing he calls the 30-day digital declutter challenge.
Oh, yeah, the 30-day challenge. I remember reading about that. It's not about throwing your phone away and becoming a hermit, is it?
No, not at all. It's more about being really intentional and trying things out. The first step is figuring out what technology you can live without for 30 days, without messing up your work or your personal life.
Okay, so things like social media, streaming services, news apps, games, all that stuff that eats up your time but isn't really adding a lot of value to your life.
Exactly. And it's important to remember this isn't about deleting these apps forever. It's just about taking a step back from them. Like, break those habits and just breathe for a minute.
So we're not saying goodbye, we're just pressing pause for a bit. I like that.
Yes. The goal is to use that time and mental energy to reconnect with activities that really matter to you, things that are actually fulfilling. He calls them high-quality leisure activities.
What are those? Like, what are some examples of high-quality leisure activities?
Well, it really depends on what you enjoy. But some examples that Newport gives are spending time in nature, having good conversations with people you care about, reading books, working on hobbies, maybe volunteering in your community,
Yeah.
or even just letting yourself do nothing, just be present.
It's like we're so used to filling every single second with something that we've completely forgotten how to just be.
It's true. And this is actually where Henry David Thoreau comes in.
Okay, I was wondering when Thoreau's going to make an appearance. Remind me who he is again and how he's connected to all of this. Okay, yeah, give me a refresher. Who is Thoreau again, and what does he have to do with digital minimalism?
Right. So Henry David Thoreau was this American writer and philosopher, lived back in the 1800s. He's most famous for this book, Walden, where he basically lived in a cabin in the woods for like 2 years. Obviously, Thoreau wasn't dealing with smartphone addiction or
So
anything.
they didn't exist back then.
Exactly. But it's really interesting that the reasons why he decided to go off the grid, they're actually really similar to what digital minimalism is all about. He felt that even back then, people were getting too caught up in material things and like meaningless work and just kind of superficial stuff.
That sounds familiar.
Right. And he thought that if he simplified his life and got rid of all the unnecessary stuff, he could actually focus on the important things like connecting with nature, writing, self-reflection, just living intentionally.
So he was basically the original digital minimalist.
Exactly. And get this, Newport actually compares Thoreau's experiences to the experiences of people who tried that 30-day digital declutter challenge. A lot of them said they felt more clear-headed and had a better sense of purpose after unplugging, almost like they were more connected to something bigger than themselves.
It's like when we create space in our lives, like physically and mentally, we open ourselves up to all these new possibilities and experiences.
Absolutely. And that brings us to the last step of the challenge, which is about being really thoughtful about how you add technology back into your life.
Okay, so after the 30 days, you're not just going back to your old habits.
No way. It's all about choosing what to let back in. Newport suggests asking yourself 3 questions before you start using any tech again. First, does this directly support something I really care about?
So if it's not a yes, it's a no.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
Then you gotta ask, is this even the best way to get to that thing I care about? Maybe there's a better way to do it offline.
That's a good point. Like if you're trying to connect with your friends, maybe actually calling them or hanging out with them is more meaningful than just liking their posts online.
Exactly. And last but not least, ask yourself, how am I going to use this to make sure it's actually adding value to my life and not just making things worse?
Okay, so even after the 30 days are over, we have to keep setting boundaries and making rules for when and how we use technology.
Exactly. Because that's really the whole point of digital minimalism. It's not about like getting rid of technology altogether. It's about being in control and using it in a way that's good for us.
Taking back control.
hmm
So besides that 30-day challenge, how else can we actually use these digital minimalism ideas in our everyday lives?
One thing Newport talks about a lot is this idea of being comfortable with solitude.
Solitude. You mean like being alone with our thoughts? That sounds kind of scary these days.
I know, right? It's almost like we're not supposed to be alone with our thoughts anymore. But it's so important for our mental well-being, and it doesn't have to be this big thing. Something as simple as like going for a walk without your phone or just sitting in silence for a few minutes can make a huge difference.
It's like you're giving your brain a break from all the noise and letting it recharge.
Exactly. And speaking of being intentional about what we let into our minds, another big part of digital minimalism is embracing slow media, as Newport calls it.
Slow media. What is that, the opposite of scrolling for hours?
Pretty much. Slow media is all about like really taking your time and engaging with information in a deeper way. Instead of just skimming headlines, maybe you choose to read a whole book. Or instead of sending a quick text, maybe you actually have a real conversation with someone.
It's about choosing quality over quantity, at least when it comes to the information we take in.
Exactly. That doesn't mean you have to get rid of social media or the news completely, but it's about being mindful of how you're using them.
So set boundaries, be intentional, maybe even delete that news app that's stressing you out. I think I'm getting it. Any last bits of wisdom from Cal Newport before we wrap up?
One of the best takeaways from the book is that digital minimalism isn't about denying yourself. It's about giving yourself more of what you actually want.
I love that.
Yeah.
So we're not saying no to technology. We're saying yes to a better, more meaningful life.
Exactly.
You know, thinking about Thoreau going to Walden Pond, it makes me realize that we can each find our own version of Walden. Maybe it's a park down the street where you can go to escape, or that stack of books you've been meaning to get to. The important thing is that you create those spaces and moments where you can disconnect from all the noise and reconnect with yourself and what really matters. That's where you'll find that sense of purpose that we're all searching for.
Well said. It's all up to you.
That feels like the perfect place to end it. Thanks for joining me for this. And to everyone listening, we hope this got you thinking and maybe even inspire you to take back some control over your digital life.